Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Zeckelman Holocaust Center. My name is Rebecca Bowen. I am an education research specialist here at the center. We are so incredibly grateful to have all of you here with us tonight for our sold-out screening of My Underground Mother. Our programs today are made possible through the generosity of our supporters. We want to extend our thank you to Nancy and Leonard Berry, Robin and Leo Eisenberg, Linda and Robert Finkel, Renee Durbin and Robert Greenberger, Jack Love of Blessed Memory and Lynn Kalish, Sandy and Martin Nessel, Paula Ray, Pamela and Charles Schiffer, Nancy and Sam Shammy and family, and Sarah Geyer and Scott Strauss. We are also incredibly proud to partner tonight with the National Council of Jewish Women, whose mission is to achieve social justice for women aligns perfectly with the themes of the film that we are to experience here tonight. We are honored to be joined by our filmmaker, Marisa Fox, this evening. Following the screening, I will be joined by Marisa for a brief Q&A to answer your questions. We will be using a QR code format to collect these questions, so when you see that code posted on the screen, please scan it with your smartphone and enter and submit your question on the form there. My Underground Mother is not only a masterclass in investigative journalism, it is, at its core, a daughter's profound act of love and historical reclamation. Marisa's search for her mother, Tamar's truth, and for the stories of the forgotten women at the Gabbersdorf labor camp brings long silenced voices back into the historical record. Women's experiences during the Holocaust were shaped in deeply specific ways because of their gender. When we center those experiences, we gain a fuller, more honest understanding of the Holocaust itself. Women and girls face particular vulnerability in the camps, and their lives and losses as mothers, daughters, and sisters carry a poignancy that is both intimate and devastating. Bringing their stories to the forefront is not only an act of remembrance, it is an act of justice. It is now my pleasure to invite NCJW's new president, Margot Stocker, to say a few words.
I'd like to thank the Zeckelman Holocaust Center for for partnering with the National Council of Jewish Women Community Partners. I'm Margot Stocker. I am the new president of National Council. National Council of Jewish Women is 135 years old and a strong advocate for women, children, and families. Our mission is to improve their lives through advocacy, programs, and projects. Some of the projects that we do are Kosher Meals on Wheels. We have a back to school store where we invite 700 Detroit children to go shopping with us. We provide backpacks for 1,300 youth in Oakland County. We make blankets for children in shelters and hospitals, and there's more. We have tutors who help with literacy with children at Pepper School in Oak Park. We have an incredible resale store in Berkeley that always needs volunteers, donors, and shoppers. There's a Green Committee and an Israel Affairs Committee and an Advocacy Committee that keeps us informed about issues that matter, plus more. Now I'd like to introduce today's filmmaker, Marisa Fox. Marisa is an award-winning journalist whose work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, Rolling Stone, CNN, The Daily Beast, and Haaretz. Throughout her career, she has reported on major world events and has focused extensively on issues on genocide, gender, and historical memory. My Underground Mother is Marisa's directorial debut. The film is a result of her decade-long journey to uncover her mother's hidden past and preserve an important history of survival. Following the screening, Marisa will join us for a conversation about her work. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Marisa, for being here with us tonight. We so appreciate it, and thank you for such a wonderful film and for sharing your mother's story with us. For those of us in the audience, once our QR code is up on the screen, please take a moment to go ahead and scan that, and then you will be able to submit your questions. If you would prefer to not do this on your smartphone, raise your hand and one of our staff members can bring you a piece of paper and a writing utensil to do it that way. I'd like to kick off our discussion with a few questions of my own. So Marisa, as a journalist, your entire career has been built on asking hard questions and chasing down facts. Yet you've noticed that one of the hardest subjects to investigate is your own family's history. How did your training as an investigative journalist both help and hinder you when confronting such a deeply personal, raw family trauma? And at what point did this journalist search for facts transform into a daughter search for healing?
First of all, thank you for such an intense question. And thank you all for coming and for being such a marvelous audience. You really are the best audience I've had. And I don't say that to every audience, I promise. I'm blown away. So journalism has been how I process the world. I was in New York on 9/11, and I was supposed to cover Fashion Week, and instead I found myself covering 9/11. And I was a young mother with 2 little kids, and it helped me unfreeze. It helped me not get caught up in the horrors and the emotions and just process and write and observe and listen and find stories that I thought could touch people. And so that's my de facto mode when I deal with the incomprehensible as well as the comprehensible. And this was incomprehensible. This was living with somebody who you think you know. And granted, I knew she had secrets because she was always telling me no more questions, and I was very inquisitive. So maybe my mother pushed me to become a journalist because I could never get the who, what, where, when of her story. But it helped me approach this story with a precise series of questions, starting with, who was she? You know, if she was a love child, then there was no way her name was the name I grew up with. And I had suspected that because she would always tell me about being in Lehi and her code name Tamar Hajinjit, the redhead. And I remember asking her, well, if that was your code name, why would you use your real name as your code name? So I always had questions. The first question, what is your name? Where are you from? What else don't I know about your past? What else were you hiding? So journalism helped me. It helped me process. It gave me that distance so that I wasn't constantly in a state of shock with every revelation.
I guess kind of along the same lines there, I know, again, this was a massive multi-year project, and it's not something that you could do on your own, I'm assuming. And I know that you relied heavily on a network of trust and expertise and shared memory, and along your journey, your paths crossed with some incredible figures in Holocaust studies and history, and some of our own local historians and our local community members that are here with us tonight. So could you talk a little bit about that process of finding your team and building those relationships within the community? And how did you experience the willingness of scholars and survivors that were featured in the film here and local advocates to lean on to help you bring these stories to light?
So once being a journalist, you can't start an investigation without some basic pieces of proof. So I got my mother's birth certificate, and then that was, I returned from that trip and I realized, okay, this is just the beginning. Now that I know her name, I need to find more. So I was told to go to this Polish Jewish genealogy group based in Montreal called Jewish Records Indexing. And they said, oh, you want your whole family tree? And I said, yeah, I would love to know my family tree. Because, when you're a 2G, and I'm just curious, how many 2Gs are in this audience? So sizable. So you know what it's like to grow up without grandparents and without a sense of where you really come from, because your parents don't really want to talk about it. So to go from not really knowing anything about my grandparents to then having Jewish records, indexing, and a man called Stanley Diamond, who sadly passed away, create a 4-page tree for me, where I found relatives, dating back to the 1700s in Poland and Germany, in that area, Katowice area, was huge. So from there, I then decided, okay, I need to find out if she was, now that I have a name, was she in the Holocaust, even though she claimed she wasn't. So I then went to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C., and they had a database. At the time, it was called the International Tracing Service. They've since renamed it Arlson Archives, and it's digitized. It got digitized largely during COVID. So from there, I was able to, team up with the ITS team, and I started going to Yad Vashem. So I started meeting with Holocaust experts. There wasn't a lot written about these Jewish women's camps. I then, being a journalist, you kind of seek out scholars. So I discovered there was a book called A Narrow Bridge to Life, written by a professor at Yad Vashem called Bella Guterman. And I met with her, got her book, and it was sort of the first book in English, let's say, that and Ann Kirshner Sala's Gift, that really talked about this network of camps. And then I became friendly with Anne, who lives in New York, and I kind of consider her my big sister in a weird way, because she sort of opened the door for me. Sala being from Sosnowiec and having a similar experience. But so those were the experts. And then once I discovered the camp, I started showing up at Holocaust survivor meetings, like just cold showing up at memorials, at survivor luncheons, and making announcements. And I got lucky. I really got lucky. That woman, Barbara, at the very beginning, who compared Sosnowiec to Hartford, Connecticut, where her son lives, I met because I made an announcement. I said, I'm looking for anybody who might be from Sosnowiec, who knows the name Hella Hockerman, or was in Gabbersdorf. And she knew all three. So I got lucky. And then once I met one, they usually led me to another. Because after liberation, these women discovered that their families were lost, were gone. So they became the family that they lost. And so I was lucky. Barbara introduced me to, I forget who else. Then I took out ads in Jewish weeklies all around the world. So I started hearing from people in Australia, in Canada, who then connected me to people in Israel. And it was suddenly like this network, this live wire just got supercharged. And it was like a windfall of people. And I will say that this has been a very meaningful location for me. Is Joseph Klein in this room or the other room? Joseph. So Joseph is from Trutnov. And his sister found me because I started filming. And she said, I'm from Trutnov. She'd read an article in the local paper there saying, journalist is filming her mother's story at this camp. And she said, I grew up in that town. And now I live in Farmington Hills. And there's a big community here. And you have to meet Charlie Silo. Charlie, you need to stand up too. And Eva introduced me to Charlie, and she said he runs support groups for survivors. So I emailed Charlie, and he said, we have 4 women from Gabbersdorf in my group. And one of them was Leah Unger's mother, who I got, Frances Herman. And so we started corresponding. And then I booked a trip here. And also Ida Moskowitz, who has since passed away, I met with her. And Sidonia, Stand Up, and Sidonia introduced me to her mother, Ida. And as you can imagine, I interviewed 50 people, 50 survivors, and I couldn't put them all in, sadly. And so it was a very tough decision. It took me years to edit all this down. But this has been a very rich community, and Charlie was sweet enough to come with me along during some of these interviews in case things got very heavy, as they did. But I think it was very therapeutic. One thing I've learned from doing this work is one way to overcome trauma is to tell your story, because then it stops being this unknowable boogeyman that controls you or that lives in the shadows. Telling your story is you mastering your past, not your past controlling you, keeping you hostage. And I think of my mother, who was such a strong woman, clearly, as you saw. And yet there was this part of her that forever lived in the shadows and that kept her captive. And her story is not unique. I mean, there are many strong women and men who've suffered great traumas, and they are afraid of confronting their past, even though it's probably the best thing you can do.
Thank you. And speaking of those women that you mentioned in the film, we have a question from our audience here. Had any of those women talked about their experiences beforehand, or were you kind of the person to facilitate opening those conversations for them?
I think for this community, Charlie gets the credit. Charlie can speak more eloquently than I can about the service he did for these women in terms of getting them to talk and meet each other and come together. But there were a bunch of women who said they'd never spoken to anybody before, and I was their first, which was quite a sacred task. And one of them, and they would often say, I had nightmares for 3 nights before you came. So, right away, I'm like, great, I'm the Grim Reaper. And then they said, and I couldn't sleep after you left, but now I can sleep again. One woman said, I felt a stone lifted from my heart. Another, Bella, my mother's best friend, her neighbor told me that, she had this terrible guilt. What did I do to alienate Hella? Why, what did I say? And she died, and I never had my chance to apologize if I offended her. She thought she had offended her. And my presence there, telling her, no, she did the same thing to me. She didn't really talk to me about herself either. She ran away from me as well. Her own daughter helped her heal. So I don't know if that answers your question, but for some of them, I was there first. Or let's say I asked questions maybe that their kids were afraid to ask. And I had that liberty because A, they weren't my mother. B, I wanted to know everything about what my mother went through and that she could never tell me. And as a woman, I guess I thought of questions that maybe a lot of men hadn't thought of, except for Charlie, of course. But I think also Shoah Foundation, they did not ask questions about sexual violence when they first started. And in fact, when a woman would start talking about something like the nude inspections and the sexual violence that they experienced, the interviewer would get uncomfortable and would immediately try to change the topic. So I guess I went there. And one of the techniques you learn as a journalist if you want to do a good interview is silence. Keep your mouth shut and let that awkward silence sort of make them fill that space. And I did that. I asked a lot of questions, but I also didn't want to push them to say things that they weren't comfortable saying. Yeah. I wanted them to feel like, they were so brave to risk their lives to tell their story in that journal. If they were caught, they'd be in so much trouble, and they'd be killed. So after all these years, I wanted them to feel like, I want you to tell your story in your own words and the way you want to tell it. And I'm not going to force my narrative on you, even though I will say, I started this sort of as Me Too was happening. So I kind of had an inkling that maybe one of the reasons why I never heard my mother's story or a lot of these stories was because of the shame that a lot of these women felt. they felt they couldn't talk about it, and because of the way survivors were treated in Israel, but also here and in other parts, women survivors are shamed, no matter what war or genocide they survive. Look at what happened to the women who survived October 7th or the women who didn't survive October 7th, and how they were shamed and called into question, and what happened to them on October 7th completely denied. So there's no glory in a woman telling her story of what happened to her if it's sexual violence. And so I just felt that there was something there, and I was very patient and tenacious.
With that being said, and those women having the opportunity for someone to finally listen to them and tell their stories, do you think, a question from our audience is, do you think that your mother would have been unhappy about her story being shared, or do you think that after some time she perhaps would have been pleased?
So it's interesting. I wonder about that a lot. When I put up the monument in Trutnov with her picture there, a part of me thought, oh my God, she probably would hate this because she didn't want to be seen as a Holocaust victim. But I don't think I portrayed any of these women as victims. I think she would be happy. I think to only show half of yourself is not living. Okay, granted, she's passed away, but you know what I mean? Like, it's not embracing your whole self. And I think, if there is such a thing as resting in peace, now she can rest in peace. Family members of mine, although not my brothers or father, have seen this movie, and they love it. People who loved her, cousins who also, their parents were Holocaust survivors, and they were very nervous. What is she going to tell? What is she going to show? And they thought I did a good job, and they thought that she was more of a hero than she ever told us. I mean, to me, she was more of a hero. To me, there is something very heroic about writing your story under captivity, of learning Hebrew in a concentration camp, of singing these songs and harnessing your humanity, the small acts of sisterhood and kindness to each other. That's heroism more than, of course, fighting for the state of Israel is an act of heroism. Founding the state, that of course was heroic, but so were these acts.
I think we can all agree that the bravery of your mother and the 350 other women in Gabbersdorf is something to be celebrated, truly, and we're so happy to do that here tonight with you. I think we have time for just one last question, and it's an important one. Where can we tell all of our friends to see the film next?
Okay, so I'm going to ask you all to do me a favor. I have flyers when you exit. I don't know what table they're on, but I promise I printed them out, and they'll be somewhere. There's a QR code. Scan the QR code and join my newsletter. I promise I won't bombard you. It's maybe twice a month I'll put out a newsletter, and I list my screenings. And I also list, you can also follow me on social media, on Instagram, on Facebook. And I am also in the midst of trying to get this out there in theaters. I have a couple of more festivals, more than a couple. I'll be in the Berkshires, on the Jersey Shore. I'll be in California in the fall. Hopefully Texas, and a couple of other locations. But we're trying to get this out there. We're trying to get this out there in theaters. We're trying to get this out there streaming, and we're trying to get this out there in schools. That's very important at a time of horrific anti-Semitism. So you all can help me by joining my newsletter. There's also on my website, myundergroundmother.com, there is, on the screenings page, there's a button for Letterboxd. And if you don't know what Letterboxd is, it's sort of like Rotten Tomatoes. It's become a big thing. And a positive review, a 5-star rating, will help me get into theaters, will help this get into streaming networks, and will help me raise money so that we can get this into schools. So please do that. Please join my newsletter, go to my website, follow me on social media, My Underground Mother, and thank you.
All right. Thank you again for being here with us tonight, for bringing this powerful film to our community. And again, thank you to everyone in the audience for being here with us tonight. We are grateful to all of our supporters and to our community partner, the National Council of Jewish Women, for making this program possible. Before we gather in the lobby for dessert reception and continued conversation, I want to invite you back to our center on Thursday, July 23rd for our next film screening, Among Neighbors, followed by a talkback with the director, Yoav Patash. You can find more details on our website. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening and drive safe home.
Thank you so much.